Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Riga Security Forum 2025. My name is Mārtiņš Vargulis. I am lecturer at the Riga Stradiņš University and director at Analytics and Advisory Group PowerHouse Latvia. And I'm really delighted that we have a guest from US joining to this podcast session. Mr. Jason Moyer, who is Nonresident Fellow at Atlantic Council. Jason, hopefully you hear us loud and clear from Washington, D.C.
Loud and clear. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Jason, we have an interesting task in following half an hour to do. So to discuss what is the hot topic or the issue, especially in the starting from 2016, I would already point it out, but definitely even before that, meaning that there have been a lot of discussions regarding European strategic autonomy that had stimulated by particular US administration. And in the context of geopolitical turbulences, in the context of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, but also taking into account and not forgetting about the other security challenges that we are facing in East Asia or in Middle East, the issue of US presence in Europe or synergy between both sides of Atlantic Ocean is crucial. Therefore, Jason, the first question would be a bit broader. How do you see how we strengthened our ties, military ties, when it comes to the specific defense of North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Or we have witnessed division between both sides? What would be the broader, so to say, picture in this regard?
Sure. I think that's a great first question. Overall, I'm quite positive about the state of the NATO alliance. I think that there's really, like most international alliances, NATO has its ups and downs. I think, looking at the 75th anniversary celebrations that took place last year, the addition of 2 new members, Finland and Sweden, to the alliance, the amount of alliance unity we've seen on display overall in support of Ukraine over the last several years. I think, really NATO is flying at an all-time high. Even, the current administration, President Trump, has been very clear in his support for NATO. He's really been, very proud of some of the concessions he's been able to get from European leaders surrounding the NATO commitment to spending on defense. And I mean, if you think about just where we were not even 10 years ago with President Macron talking about NATO being brain dead, I think that, adding 2 new members and the alliance undergoing such a profound transformation to spend more on its own defense, I think, the alliance really has improved overall in the last decade. Of course, there's always more room for improvement, and there's always more countries that are seeking to join NATO. Maybe we can get into that later.
Exactly. But exactly what you pointed out. So it was already 2014. So it was a summit in Wales when heads of state and government declared the ambition that they will spend at least 2% of GDP by 2024. And there have been a lot of speculation whether without US and particularly without Donald Trump administration, we would reach 2%, or at least the number of countries that have reached already by now would be the same, right? But having said that, and coming back to your quotation of Emmanuel Macron regarding the brain dead organization, but also there was another one, that NATO is an obsolete organization. Into the second presidency of Donald Trump, do you believe that he still perceives NATO as an obsolete, or with our, I mean European attempts to increase defense spending, he doesn't anymore perceive NATO as an obsolete organization?
I don't think he views NATO as obsolete. He might have thought that coming into the start of this new administration. Certainly there was some mixed messaging over the last 8 months. But I think, if you look at, especially in the last 2 or 3 months, his messaging has been very consistent on NATO. He's been very supportive. He's been very happy to see a number of countries, in particularly the Baltic countries, stepping up and already announcing concrete plans to get to 5% of their GDP, to be allocated for defense. I think, if you look back at, as well, just the kind of the original kind of the start of the administration, there were genuinely concerns that President Trump would try to withdraw the United States from NATO. We have not seen that happen. We have not seen this kind of really dramatic, kind of reduction in force across Europe. We've seen, there's been some talk of a rotating brigade in Romania not being renewed. We're still waiting for the national security strategy as well as the force posture review. But I think if you look at overall, this administration remains fairly positive on NATO, and in particular on the countries that have already hit the 2% goal, as well as the ones that are on their way to 5%. We've seen that they've had more access in Washington. We've seen that they have been more open to the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, are more willing to take meetings with countries that have already spent and are meeting their obligations under NATO.
But what's your speculation? We have heard last week or week before the last one that the announcement to decrease the level of U.S. troops in particular countries, so in Europe. Will we see something like that in the future? Remembering also one of the last foreign security policy decision in the first presidency of Donald Trump was regarding that. Would we see that withdrawal of U.S. troop presence in Europe? And can we somehow stop it or facilitate not to do that as Europeans?
Yeah, it's hard to say what this administration plans regarding troop deployment in Europe. During the first Trump administration, there was a lot of focus on the U.S. troops in Germany in particular, and some of that was due to the bilateral relationship between the United States and Germany at the time. President Trump and the German Chancellor Angela Merkel really clashed in multiple ways, and I always saw the threat to remove U.S. troops from Germany as part of that kind of interpersonal dynamic. Everything that I've heard about the forthcoming force posture review has been positive for NATO's eastern flank. It's a very minor drawdown, if any drawdown at all. Of course, this is just the rumors we hear. We'll have to wait and see what the final document entails. As far as how to keep the United States, kind of presence as it currently stands in Europe, or to keep it from drawing down too far, I think the answer there is Congress. Congress has already kind of bristled at the idea of the president, kind of exercising this power to withdraw so many troops from overseas, from Europe. I've argued before as well that U.S. troops in Europe is not just about European security. It's also about power projection into the Middle East, into Northern Africa. There's a reason why the United States Africa Command is headquartered in Europe and not elsewhere in the world. I think there's so many valid reasons to continue to have a strong U.S. troop placement in Europe. I was recently in southern Estonia, not far from the Latvian border, talking to U.S. troops that were stationed there, and they were so overwhelmingly positive about their experiences in country. They talked about the amount of exposure they had, the amount of training opportunities they had, just being used to the terrain, being used to the conditions of operating at night. They've really learned so much from being in country, and that kind of experience will save lives if there is a potential conflict. So I think there's a very clear understanding of that in Washington, especially with Congress, and I think Congress might push back against the president's desire to draw down U.S. troops in Europe.
Exactly, and that was something very similar that we found out when the discussion regarding the military financial aid to the Baltic states were discussed. Firstly, it was announced that the U.S. will stop any kind of financial aid that has been very instrumental to our defense. We started from the scratch in 1990s, and with U.S. knowledge, but also with the with the dollars coming from US that were spent also to buy some US equipment. And that's how we also contributed to the military industry of US. Tiny, but still, that was win-win for both sides, and definitely would like to see that and continue. And having said that, what is, if I may say so, what is the role of the Baltic states within this perception? You know, we would love to believe that Baltic states have exceptional place in the hearts and minds of U.S. foreign and security policy makers. Is it so? How you would describe that? Because have been also a couple of famous interactions also coming from Donald Trump, illustrating specific countries and whether he's ready to defend if that is the case. How would you perceive, not only from him personally, but within the Washington, D.C. and broader, what is the role of the Baltic states? Are we different than any other European countries? We would love to believe that.
I would agree with that as well. I mean, really, the three Baltic states punch far above their weight in Washington. There's a consistent, set messaging that are coming from the various Baltic foreign ministers and defense ministers when they come to Washington. They're very unified in their approach towards Washington. I hear only positive things about the meetings that take place between Baltic ministers and their U.S. counterparts. The messaging just being very clear of what can we do, what else can we do to kind of proactively shape European security. What can the Baltic states do to, improve the situation? And I think that messaging has been very well received in Washington. I mean, if you look back at the March meeting between the three foreign ministers from the Baltic states, as well as Secretary Rubio, that was a very high level, very early on meeting. I don't think that you see a lot of European countries getting that level of access so early on in this administration. And I think, in terms of in terms of President Trump's commitment to defending every inch of NATO territory, I think we've seen kind of a couple different iterations where he's called into question Article 5. Overall, I'm quite positive that, especially given kind of the context of U.S.-Russian relations at the moment, President Trump has been quite frustrated with President Putin. He's tried repeatedly to strike a deal, and President Putin is not playing ball. And I think there's been a lot of kind of shifting in U.S. approaches towards Russia over the last 8 months. We're at a very different place than when we started out. I like to think that, this has all been to the benefit of Europe, and in particular, the Baltic states and Latvia.
But do you believe that the position regarding Ukraine and also attitude towards, personally, to the president of Russian Federation has changed in the recent weeks and months? Because this is something that we have the discussion and also in public regarding that we see that there have been some changes in the perception.
Yeah, I hope so. I genuinely hope so. Like many people, I watched the initial White House meeting between President Trump, President Zelensky, Vice President Vance, and was horrified. I mean, that's no way to treat a leader of a country who his people are actively fighting for their existential existence on behalf of the rest of the West. I think that was really quite striking to see how he was received in Washington. But since then, we see a very different Zelensky in Washington. We see a much jovial, much more lighthearted Zelensky, bantering with the press, even changing the way he dresses when he comes to meetings at the White House. I think there really has been a shift. I really genuinely do hope that that there's been a lot of good influence, especially some folks have pointed to the Finnish president, Alexander Stubb, as having a good influence on President Trump's perception of Ukraine. I think that, there unfortunately still is kind of a drumbeat within this administration of trying to reconcile relations with Russia with the goal of eventually kind of reestablishing economic and diplomatic relations. So that's the part that worries me still, is whether that push for re-engaging the Russian economy, which of course would allow, Putin to continue his illegal war in Ukraine. Whether that, kind of takes precedent, but for now, it seems as though, Ukraine and Zelensky are higher on Trump's mind than the economic relationship with Russia.
Well, that's hopefully we'll see the continuation of such a policy, because we have seen, ping pong or changing the attitude from week to week, and there have been a couple of weeks that you believe here this is it. So we see finally the change of the attitude and also the strategy, right, when it comes to Ukraine. I wanted to ask you regarding also the Europe and US involvement in our security, and that is the main part of our discussion about the society's perception. We are speaking about particular administration that is quite a different, comparing that to the previous one, and we know what were the results of the elections. What would you say the overall attitude of the U.S. citizens regarding U.S. presence in Europe, whether it's pro or against that?
That's a great question. There's this excellent organization out of Chicago, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and every year they do a survey of how popular is NATO within the country. And they're mostly sampling, countries in kind of the Midwest, in the middle of the United States, countries that maybe aren't as naturally inclined to be pro-international engagement or pro-European. And consistently, NATO approval hovers at around 50%. It went below 50% for the first time a few years ago. I think that was pre-invasion of Ukraine. But, consistently the public supports NATO. And I think that there's actually a lot of appetite in the United States to learn more about the United States' role in Europe, to learn more about transatlantic security topics. Every time myself or my colleagues are traveling in the Midwest or in the middle of the country, and we do an event or we do some kind of talk, there's incredible turnout. There's so many people that are looking kind of to go beyond just the headlines and actually understand what the United States' role is in European security. Why does NATO continue to be such an important alliance? I think that that's not going to change anytime soon. I think that generally speaking, what we're seeing in the United States in terms of social trends is an aversion to conflict and an aversion to kind of these endless wars that have permeated United States society for decades now. So I think we're seeing an aversion to that. But overall, I mean, there's so many positive examples of U.S. troops coming back from Europe, and I mean, my own stepbrother is in the National Guard in Pennsylvania, regularly goes to Lithuania, has had only positive things to say about his time in the Baltics, and he shares that with all of his friends and family, and before you know, really the word gets out about how impressed him and his colleagues in the National Guard are by the Baltic Armed Forces.
Exactly, and this is the definitely point to mention, because you were speaking about U.S. presence in some of the military drills that we are having here in the Baltic states. U.S. troops mainly are stationed in Poland, as we say, on other side of the Suwalki corridor. Definitely we would like to have them on this side, taking into account that strength and power are the only elements respected in Kremlin, and definitely with the U.S. presence you can ensure or strengthen the credibility of the whole NATO, right? But especially what you were mentioning, it's about interoperability. We were participating in mission in Afghanistan, right, after 9/11. We share the same values, we share the same norms, and definitely believe that it is still part of this alliance, right? The basic principles of this alliance. Having said all of that, actually, when I was thinking about our discussion, I came back to the conclusion that we had already something very similar, the discussion regarding the European strategic autonomy, Europeans on their own. actually during the Obama administration. The famous policy, the pivot towards East Asia, right? That resulted in letters signed by 100, how many, I don't recall exact number, the leaders of Central and Eastern European countries, including our former President Friedrich-Ebert and Minister of Foreign Affairs Sandra Kalniete, stating that, well, there is no place for security vacuum. I mean, if you are leaving, there will be security vacuum, and therefore someone, meaning Russia, could fulfill this vacuum. So therefore, is it about the elephant in the room? Is it about China? Whether the position regarding the change of position towards Europeans is mostly about China, meaning that Europeans, you take control over the European landscape. We have more dangerous element to deal with.
Yeah, that ties back into your original question. So on European strategic autonomy, I remember I was actually an intern at the State Department when the pivot to Asia was first announced, and it became the word pivot became like a really bad word. We couldn't use pivot. We couldn't talk about pivoting in any other context because it became so politically charged. And I was very concerned at the time that the United States was really turning its back on our European allies. And as a staunch transatlanticist, it was really hard to reconcile that. And I think that, as you said earlier, President Trump has really been a major, I've said this before, he's a major driver of European strategic autonomy. More so than President Emmanuel Macron, more so than Ursula von der Leyen, take your pick. It was President Trump's first administration where we really saw an acceleration of European strategic autonomy as a concept, as well as just a practical, the number of projects that began under PESCO during that time. I can only see that as a direct response to the first Trump administration. And now here we are in a second Trump administration, and I think it's worth kind of re-examining the goals of strategic autonomy. I think that some of the stuff that the EU is doing on the security and defense front, talking about more joint borrowing, more joint procurement, I think that can only stand to benefit Europe. And I think there are still people in Washington that are very pro-strategic autonomy, arguing that it's really, to the benefit of the United States to have a more capable Europe, a Europe that invests more in its own defense, and that will only bode well for the United States down the road. And I think everyone is kind of looking ahead to China. President Trump just came off of a whirlwind visit to Asia, where there were a number of breakthroughs in U.S.-China relations. But despite that, I think there's still, China remains a top concern for the United States. I've heard, various versions of the national security strategy have kind of emphasized more of a homeland security approach first, which is the first time in many years that China hasn't been seen as the number one threat to the United States. But I think regardless, there is this sense that China is not going anywhere, and the United States is very much, kind of concerned with China's control over supply chains, rare earth minerals, the production, there's so many elements of the supply chain that favor China at the moment. And I think there's a lot of concern that within the United States that Europe might, kind of move closer towards China. And what does that mean for overall U.S. power globally?
But do you believe in the term reversed Kissinger? I mean, the whole issue regarding minimizing or facilitating relationship with Russia to counterbalance China, or the fear that tango between China and Russia could definitely diminish the security of U.S. That is the grand strategy, and therefore we see also the U.S. policy when it comes to Ukraine in such a way.
Yeah, I don't personally believe in the reverse Kissinger idea. I think that's something that, we're kind of attributing towards the United States's foreign policy. I think that if you look at how U.S. foreign policy is currently implemented, it's very top down. A lot of it comes from President Trump. You have a handful of people within his cabinet that are much more in the restrainer camp. We're talking about J.D. Vance. We're talking about, kind of your Pete Hegseth. They're much more interested in keeping the United States out of international entanglements. I think the reverse Kissinger I don't see that being kind of the driving factor. I think it actually goes back to more of kind of Trump's acumen as a businessman. I think he sees the size of the Russian, the country of the Russian Federation. He sees the size of the economy, and he sees that as a potential market, more or less. He wants to build hotels there. I don't think he sees it as, kind of this larger 3D chess of let's have Russia, kind of pulled away from China. And especially when it comes to things like the Arctic, I think we're seeing so much cooperation between Russia and China, investments in infrastructure, investments in, in the shipping capabilities. We've already seen a number of Chinese companies have sent cargo vessels along the polar sea routes, trying to shave some time and therefore save money on international shipping to Europe. I think that's only going to intensify. I just don't think that there's any way to kind of pull Russia and China apart when ideologically they're so much more closely aligned. We saw this with the BRICS summit earlier this year. There's really kind of the adversaries of the United States and Europe are working together in new and profound ways. And I think that we need to be ready to kind of meet that challenge.
Yeah, but coming back to the business, I remember I was still in the Washington, D.C. in my research project when the discussion regarding 60 billion financial aid to Ukraine was discussed. And specifically because of Donald Trump and his closed allies within his administration, that was so painful. What is your prediction when it comes to the next financial aid, if any, coming from the White House, and then discussions within this settlement of the Congress?
Yeah. It's really hard to say whether there will be any further aid packages or any further weapons deployments. I think a lot of that depends more on Putin than anything else. If President Trump is able to sit down with President Putin again or get further along in these negotiations, we might see that there are no further aid packages to Ukraine. I, like you, have similarly kind of, been very frustrated to hear this quantification of support for Ukraine with numbers and with dollars. It's about so much more than that. I mean, Ukraine is fighting an existential conflict against an aggressor, against what was considered one of the world's largest militaries. And Ukraine has really done such, has made such incredible progress. And I think that the United States can and should be doing more. I'm not in a position to make those kind of decisions, unfortunately, but it is incredible to see so many European countries stepping up and doing more. I think if we're looking ahead, I think accelerating Ukraine's EU membership, I think looking at, having much more tangible security guarantees for Ukraine outside of the NATO context, I think that will be kind of the most tangible next steps forward for Ukraine.
What would be the necessity from the European Union, or how this administration would look? What is the required elements from the Europe then in this regard?
Yeah, I don't think that this administration places the EU very highly in its regards. I think that this has been kind of a recurring theme, that there's more of an interest in bilateral negotiations and less of a preference to engage with multilateral institutions like the EU. I've seen multiple, interactions between President von der Leyen and President Trump, and I don't get the sense that there's much of
respect.
I don't even know if I'd say respect. I think there isn't much progress being made from the meetings, if that makes sense. I think that it's very performatory. They come together, they kind of meet, but there isn't a lot that comes out of these meetings. So in that sense, I think that this is kind of a very much a moment for the European Union to step up, and there's been a lot of talk of treaty reform. There's been a lot of talk of what countries to admit next. There's some focus on some of the Western Balkans countries that are doing quite well at the moment, Albania, Montenegro. But I think that, you know, the EU really should kind of reassess its neighborhood policy and talk more seriously about, you know, what steps Ukraine itself needs to take in order to get closer towards membership, because promising something for 10 years from now is not good enough in the current moment.
But definitely there is a veto or no-go for Ukraine towards any kind of integration in NATO within this administration, is it?
Yeah, I don't think that's changed, unfortunately. And it's not just the United States. There's a number of other European countries that have expressed similar concerns. At the NATO summit in Vilnius, there was a handful of countries that were standing between Ukraine and kind of pursuing full membership. And then after that, we had all those bridge metaphors, if you remember those, the Iron Bridge, the Long Bridge, the well-lit bridge towards NATO membership for Ukraine. And I think that also it's just not good enough. I mean, there needs to be a much more concerted effort, a much clearer path for Ukraine into NATO.
Definitely, and here the Ramstein format or military planning towards like a long-lasting and planned military and financial aid to Ukraine, including also having Americans on the board, as well as Europeans delivering, is so much needed. In this regard, I don't want to put you on the hot seat, but still, regarding midterm elections, would you say that it somehow could change the dynamics of this administration as well? Of course, it's speculation what will be the result, but the other speculation is that Donald Trump has the window of opportunity still the midterm election, and therefore his position is more aggressive and more forward-looking, taking into account that he is also not, he doesn't know what will be the end of that midterm elections. So what would be your speculation on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, my speculation aligns with what you just said, more or less. I do think that there's going to be a push by this administration to get as much done as possible before the midterms. Traditionally, the midterms do tend to kind of go against the party that's currently in power, just the way that it's always been. Actually, today is a pretty major election day in a number of different races across the United States, and there's a lot of attention being paid to those and to what extent those will be kind of early bellwethers of the future of U.S. politics. You have a major gubernatorial election in Virginia, where kind of there's a very much kind of an outsider Democrat candidate who's seen as the potential next governor of Virginia. You also have the mayor of New York is being decided, which has gotten a lot of attention because the leading candidate is kind of further to the left than traditional. And I think that there is this sense of like, well, you know, is this going to kind of set the Democratic Party up for the next election cycle? Is there going to be more of a push to go to the left? So I think we're actively seeing kind of U.S. politics evolve in real time. And yeah, I mean, the midterms are going to be probably the best check to the current administration's level of power and level of influence. That's something I've tried to get across in my conversations with European counterparts, is the extent to which U.S. institutions have been reshaped, have been completely reorganized. There's been mass firings on an unprecedented scale of U.S. government employees. This directly impacts the United States' ability to conduct its foreign policy. This directly impacts how European countries engage in Washington. It creates a culture of fear among the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of State, where officials might not be willing to meet with their European counterparts. This all kind of trickles down, and I think it would have kind of a longer term impact on U.S. foreign policy in a way that I think we're still kind of seeing play out in real time.
I absolutely agree with you that even if there is a change of administration and the party, I mean, definitely the ideas, or even some scholars are stating the ideology, right, also within the society is still very present. I mean that this is not the same US and not the same the society that we were experiencing during the Cold War, right? The society is also changing, and one or another president or candidate is using this momentum, the sentiment, and on that building. But it's also illustrating the internal issues, internal security concerns that are, of course, relevant, and therefore raising the questions how much we invest in this regard in Europe. But the final and concluding, if I may, Jason, question or advice to European leaders, taking into account current US administration, understanding the geopolitical turbulences, understanding what are the sentiment in the society as well as within the administration. What would be your 3 top recommendations for European leaders? How should we treat our industry, defense industry? What should be our main steps to be taken?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. 3 recommendations. I think absolutely Europe needs to invest more in its own defense industry. I think that this is something that will just benefit Europe more broadly over a longer period of time. This is going to create jobs. This is going to make both Europe and kind of the European Union less dependent on international providers for military equipment. I think it's something that we've really kind of, the conflict in Ukraine has really driven home how fragmented the European defense industry is. And now's the time to really kind of implement a lot of those changes that the European Commissioner for Defense has really been talking about. Andrius Kubilius, he's been talking a lot about ways to reform the defense industrial base to benefit Europe in the long run. Second, I would say continue to maintain that support for Ukraine. It's of course, very much not in my own, thinking. It's not in my own ideological. It doesn't align with my own views that the United States has pulled back so much in its support of Ukraine. But I think that Europe really stepping up to meet the moment has not gone unnoticed. Mm-hmm. I really talk about how Germany's now stepped up and is one of the largest providers of military equipment and aid to Ukraine. I regularly talk about the multiple packages that the Baltic countries send to Ukraine, the number of Ukrainian refugees that have been welcomed by the Baltic states. And there's so many stories there that are being relayed here in Washington, but maintaining that high level of support for Ukraine. And then the third thing is, my third piece of advice to European leaders is don't forget about the United States. I know that seems silly, but at the end of the day, this is very much a, I don't want to make it sound like things will go back to, pre-Trump to, in a new administration. I think that whether we like it or not, the state of the world, the state of the global economy, the power dynamics between countries has been irrevocably changed by this administration. But that being said, there is a real sense that, we have to continue to work together. We have to continue to cooperate. There remains so many committed transatlanticists in Washington, in the United States more broadly. And I think that European leaders would do well to kind of explore areas outside of Washington, D.C., to make the case directly to folks in the Midwest about why NATO is important, about why European security is American security. The two are not two distinct concepts. We've seen this with multiple conflicts over the last 100 years, that when European security is American security.
Well, Jason, this is brilliant conclusion. Don't forget about the U.S. We were always saying that. Don't forget about the Europe. This is reminds me the famous quote from the Winston Churchill, who said, "You can always count on U.S. that it will do the right thing but after all of the other opportunities will be tested, right? And I think it is very similar to the US and this administration. We are coming to this point, I think so. And also from the European perspective, as you said, this is our time to step in. We started with the discussion within the German society regarding helmets to be provided to Ukraine as an escalatory step. Now we are discussing regarding IRIS-T air defense systems. So this is also the shift. And I think somehow Donald Trump and his position has contributed to that and strengthening European Union or strengthening European strategic autonomy. We're strengthening North Atlantic Treaty Organization as well. With that, thank you, Jason. It was a pleasure to meet you online, to discuss with you. We are much closer than we think, and definitely we have common threats also outside there in the real world, and therefore we need like a joint endeavors to step against them. But for you, stay tuned for other episodes of this Riga Security Forum. A couple of interesting to come. Thank you.
Thank you again.